The sky was painted in fire and ash, a constant reminder of the war that had ravaged the world for over a decade. Cities had fallen, nations had crumbled, and humanity had been reduced to fragments of what it once was. The resistance fought against the Dominion, a brutal regime that sought to control the remnants of civilization through force and fear. And somewhere in the midst of all this chaos, a single soldier ran for his life. Dane Voss was the last of his unit, the only one left standing after their mission had gone sideways. His body was battered, his uniform torn, his rifle down to its last few rounds. He had spent years fighting, surviving ambushes, dodging snipers, and outmaneuvering drones programmed to hunt people like him. But now, alone in the ruined outskirts of what had once been a thriving city, he knew his time was running out. A low hum filled the air. A Dominion patrol. Their machines were relentless, their foot soldiers merciless. Dane ducked into the shadows, pressing his back against a crumbling concrete wall. He steadied his breath, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He needed to move. Now. Before he could take another step, something grabbed his wrist. Instinct took over. He spun, ready to strike, but stopped mid-motion. A girl. No, a woman, no older than her early 20s, stood before him, eyes wide but unwavering. She put a finger to her lips and gestured for him to follow. He had no choice. The patrol was closing in, their boots echoing through the ruins. She led him through a narrow alley, past burnt-out vehicles and remnants of a world that once knew peace. At last, they reached a hidden passage beneath a collapsed bridge. She pulled him inside just as the patrol passed by, their laser sights scanning the area where he had been just moments ago. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He studied her. Dark hair tied back in a loose braid, skin smudged with dust, but there was an undeniable fire in her eyes. She was a survivor, just like him. "You're lucky I found you first," she finally said, her voice low but firm. Dane narrowed his eyes. "And who exactly are you?" "Lena," she answered. "And you're bleeding." Only then did he notice the warmth spreading down his side. The adrenaline had masked it, but now pain surged through him. A gunshot wound, probably from when he had escaped the ambush. He gritted his teeth. He had survived worse. Lena didn't wait for him to argue. She tore a strip from her own shirt and pressed it against the wound. He hissed at the sting. "You need a real medic," she muttered. "I need to keep moving," he countered. "Yeah? And where exactly do you plan on going?" He hesitated. He had no answer. His unit was gone. His mission was a failure. He was supposed to make it back to the resistance base, but now he had nothing. Lena sighed, as if she could see the war waging inside him. "I know someone who can help. But you have to trust me." Dane had spent years learning not to trust anyone, but right now, he had no other option. They moved through the underground tunnels beneath the ruins, avoiding drones, scavengers, and Dominion patrols. The world above was a battlefield, but down here, it was a different kind of danger, one of silence and shadows. Lena led him to a hidden refuge, deep in the tunnels. The moment they stepped inside, he realized it was more than just a hideout. There were people, survivors, families, children, the last remnants of those who refused to bow to the Dominion. A doctor, an older man with sharp eyes, took Dane into a dimly lit room and worked on his wound. As the needle pierced his skin, stitching him back together, Lena sat nearby, arms crossed. "You're resistance, aren't you?" she asked. Dane hesitated, then nodded. "Was." She studied him for a moment. "You lost your team." "Yeah." A flicker of understanding passed between them. She knew that kind of loss. He didn't need to ask how. Days passed. Dane recovered, slowly. He learned that Lena wasn't just some survivor. She was a fighter, a strategist, someone who had saved more lives than she could count. The Dominion had taken everything from her, her home, her family, but she refused to give up. One night, as they sat near a dim fire, she told him about the resistance base she had heard rumors about. A place where survivors were gathering, preparing for the final stand against the Dominion. "You should come with me," she said. Dane scoffed. "I thought you didn't trust me." She smirked. "I don't, but I need backup." Something shifted between them that night. A connection forged not in words, but in the unspoken understanding between two people who had lost everything yet refused to surrender. The journey was brutal. They faced Dominion patrols, relentless drones, and the harsh realities of a broken world. But together, they fought. Side by side, they took down enemies, outmaneuvered traps, and survived when they shouldn't have. Dane had always been a soldier, but for the first time, he fought not just because he had to, but because he had something worth fighting for. By the time they reached the resistance base, he knew. He had found something he never thought he would again. A reason to keep going. As they stood at the entrance, looking over the gathering forces preparing for the final battle, Lena glanced at him. "You in?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. Yeah, because this time, he wasn't fighting alone. And he wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a survivor. And so was she. Together, they would change everything. The resistance base was unlike anything Dane had seen in years. Hidden deep within the remnants of a collapsed city, it was a fortress built from scavenged technology and sheer willpower. Fighters moved with precision, engineers pieced together makeshift weapons, and strategists huddled over maps illuminated by flickering lanterns. This wasn't just a ragtag group of survivors. This was an army. As Dane and Lena approached the main command tent, a tall, battle-hardened woman stepped forward. Scars lined her arms, and her sharp blue eyes studied them both like a predator, sizing up potential allies or threats. "You must be the soldier we've been hearing about," she said, arms crossed. Dane gave a slight nod. Dane Voss, formerly of the 112th Recon Unit. Her gaze flicked to Lena. "And you?" Lena smirked. "Just someone who's tired of running." The woman exhaled, then extended her hand. "Commander Reyes, we need every fighter we can get. If you're serious about this war, welcome to the fight." Dane shook her hand. He had spent so long drifting, surviving without a purpose. Now, for the first time in a long while, he had one. That night, as the base buzzed with preparation, Lena and Dane sat near the outskirts, watching the fires burn against the darkness. The weight of everything pressed against them. What they had lost, what they were about to face, and what little time they had left before the war consumed them entirely. "You could leave, you know," Lena said, not looking at him. "You don't owe them anything." Dane turned toward her. "And what about you? Are you staying?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think it's time to stop running." "Then so am I," he said without a second thought. She finally met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "You don't have to do this for me, Dane." "I'm not," he said. "I'm doing it because I believe in this. In them. In us." A small smile tugged at her lips. "Us?" Dane let the words settle between them before responding. "Yeah, us." Their moment was cut short by the sound of alarms blaring through the camp. Shouts rang out, and in an instant, the base was alive with movement. Dane grabbed his rifle. "What is it?" Lena asked, already on her feet. Reyes sprinted toward them, her face grim. "Scouts just spotted Dominion forces heading this way. A full assault team. They know we're here." Dane exchanged a look with Lena. They had known the fight would come eventually. They just hadn't expected it so soon. "Positions now," Reyes barked. The resistance fighters scrambled into place, fortifying their defenses as the ground trembled beneath the weight of approaching Dominion machines. Dane climbed onto an abandoned rooftop, his sniper rifle in hand, while Lena stayed on the ground, leading a team of guerrilla fighters. The sky lit up with the first wave of enemy fire. Explosions rocked the base. Screams and gunfire filled the air. The battle had begun. Dane took his first shot, dropping a Dominion soldier from 100 yards away. He didn't have time to process the kill before another wave of enemies charged forward. "Lena, on your left," he shouted. She whirled, bringing down an enemy with a well-placed shot, then moved with the fluidity of someone who had spent her entire life fighting to survive. She wasn't just quick, she was lethal. They fought as though they had done this 1,000 times before, covering each other's blind spots, calling out warnings, and refusing to back down. But the Dominion's forces were relentless. Massive combat mechs stomped through the ruins, firing plasma rounds that melted steel like wax. Then, through the chaos, Dane spotted something that made his blood run cold. a Dominion juggernaut. The towering war machine was nearly indestructible, its armor reinforced with energy shields. It moved toward the base with terrifying purpose, its cannons charging up for a blast that would wipe out half the resistance fighters in a single shot. Dane knew they had seconds to act. "Lena," he called, already running toward her. She saw it too, eyes widening. "We need to take it down before it fires." Dane scanned the battlefield, searching for a weakness. The Dominion designed their machines to be impervious to small arms fire, but they had one flaw: power cores exposed for brief seconds when their shields recharged. He had one shot. "Lena, cover me," he yelled, sprinting toward a wrecked vehicle that gave him just enough height to get the angle he needed. She moved without hesitation, firing at approaching enemies, giving him the opening he needed. Dane took a deep breath, steadied his aim, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew true, slamming into the power core just as the juggernaut's shields flickered. The explosion that followed was deafening. Fire and metal erupted into the sky as the war machine collapsed in on itself. The battlefield went still for a moment, the Dominion forces hesitating at the sight of their most powerful weapon reduced to rubble. Then, like a tide breaking, the resistance pushed forward. The battle raged until the last Dominion soldier fell. When the dust finally settled, Dane stood amidst the wreckage, his rifle heavy in his hands. He turned, searching for Lena. He found her near the ruins of a wall, blood streaked down her arm but a victorious grin on her face. "Hell of a shot, soldier." He exhaled, relieved. "Took you long enough to notice." She stepped closer, her expression softening. "I noticed a long time ago." Dane wasn't sure what came over him, but in that moment, he didn't care. He closed the distance between them, and before either of them could overthink it, he kissed her. Lena tensed for a second, then melted into him, her hands gripping the front of his uniform like she had no intention of ever letting go. The battle, the war, the blood and death, it all faded, if only for a moment. When they pulled apart, she smirked. "You realize this changes everything, right?" Dane brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "Yeah, and I wouldn't have it any other way." The war wasn't over. They both knew that. But they also knew they wouldn't be fighting it alone. Together, they had saved each other. And together, they would finish what they started. The days after the battle were a blur of exhaustion, grief, and quiet victories. The resistance had won the fight, but the war was far from over. Dominion forces would retaliate soon, and everyone knew it. They worked tirelessly to fortify the base, scavenging what they could from fallen enemy machines, repairing weapons, and preparing for the next inevitable assault. Dane found himself working alongside Lena more than ever. They moved as if they had always been a team, reading each other's thoughts, anticipating each other's actions. The battlefield had bound them in ways neither had expected. But it wasn't just the war that drew them closer. It was the moments in between. The stolen glances, the quiet conversations when no one else was listening, the way Lena would nudge him with her shoulder when she thought he was being too serious. One evening, as the sky bled into hues of orange and violet, Dane found her standing alone on the outskirts of the camp. She was leaning against a broken pillar, staring at the horizon as if expecting something to rise from the ashes. "You keep sneaking off," he said, stepping beside her. She smirked. "You keep following." He shrugged. "Can't help it." She let out a breath, her smirk fading. "Do you think we actually have a chance?" Dane didn't answer immediately. He had spent years watching battles unfold, knowing that sometimes, no matter how much you fought, you still lost. But this felt different. "I think we have something worth fighting for," he finally said. "That has to count for something." Lena turned to him, her expression unreadable. Then, before he could react, she leaned up and kissed him. It wasn't like the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss from the battlefield. This was slow, lingering, filled with something deeper than just survival. When she pulled away, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then let's make it count." The next attack came at dawn. Explosions shattered the silence, tearing through the resistance base with merciless precision. The Dominion had returned, and they had brought their full strength. Dane and Lena were already on their feet, weapons drawn as the camp erupted into chaos. Reyes. Dane barked into his radio. What's the situation? The commander's voice crackled through the static. They hit our defenses hard. We're being pushed back. Lena cursed under her breath. We have to cut off their supply line, or we won't last another hour. Dane's mind raced. The Dominion always operated with mobile command centers, massive, armored carriers that directed their forces. If they could take it out, the assault would crumble. He looked at Lena, knowing exactly what she was thinking. You and me? She grinned, gripping her rifle. Always. They broke from the battle, weaving through wreckage and gunfire, moving like shadows toward the enemy command center. It was heavily guarded, towering over the battlefield like a steel beast. How do we get inside? Lena whispered. Dane studied the patterns of the guards, noting a weak spot near the rear engines. We go loud. Lena smirked. Now you're speaking my language. They moved fast. Dane took out the first guard with a silenced shot, while Lena lobbed a grenade into the group stationed by the entrance. The explosion sent bodies flying, and before the dust settled, they were already inside. The command center was a maze of corridors and security checkpoints. They fought their way through, clearing room after room, until they reached the control chamber. Dane kicked the door open. Inside, Dominion officers turned in shock, scrambling for weapons. But they were too slow. Shots rang out, and within seconds, the room was theirs. Lena rushed to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. If I can override their network, I can shut down their drones and automated defenses. Dane covered the door, firing at incoming soldiers. Then do it fast. Lena cursed as the system locked her out. They're trying to regain control. I need more time. Dane reloaded, taking down another wave of enemies. Time is the one thing we don't have. Then, through the chaos, he heard it. The high-pitched whine of charging plasma cannons. He turned to the window and his stomach dropped. A Dominion warship hovered above the battlefield, its weapons locked on the resistance base. They're going to level everything, Dane muttered. Lena's eyes flicked to the ship. Then, determination hardened her features. Not if I can help it. She abandoned the console and sprinted toward a secondary terminal. Lena, what the hell are you doing? She didn't answer. She hacked into the warship's command systems, her hands flying across the keys. A warning alarm blared through the command center. Then, suddenly, the warship's cannons shifted, turning, locking onto Dominion forces instead. Dane's eyes widened. You hijacked their own ship? Lena grinned. Told you I was good with tech. Before the Dominion could react, the warship opened fire, obliterating their own ranks. The battlefield shifted in an instant. The resistance, seeing their enemy in disarray, surged forward. Rhea's voice came through the radio. Whatever you two did, it's working. Dane grabbed Lena's hand. Time to go. They sprinted out of the command center as explosions rocked the structure. They barely made it out before the entire thing collapsed in flames. As they emerged, they found the resistance standing victorious. The Dominion forces were retreating. The battle was won. Days later, as the resistance celebrated, Dane and Lena stood on the outskirts once more, watching the stars above. You saved us, Dane said, his voice full of admiration. Lena shook her head. We saved each other. Dane reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. What now? She smiled, leaning against him. Now, we build something worth fighting for. And as they stood together, amidst the ruins of war and the hope of a new beginning, they knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days after the battle were filled with both triumph and uncertainty. The Dominion had been pushed back, but they were far from defeated. The resistance knew it was only a matter of time before another attack came, stronger and more relentless than before. Dane and Lena spent their time helping to rebuild what had been lost. The base was fortified with whatever scraps they could salvage, and new recruits arrived daily, inspired by the victory they had achieved. For the first time in a long while, hope began to grow. But even as the resistance prepared for the next battle, something was shifting between Dane and Lena. One evening, as they worked side by side repairing a stolen Dominion transport, Dane caught Lena staring at him. What? He asked, smirking. She shook her head, smiling slightly. I still can't believe you're here. That we're here. Dane wiped the sweat from his brow, leaning against the metal hull of the transport. You saved me, Lena. That night in the forest, you didn't have to stop for me. But you did. She exhaled, crossing her arms. I didn't want to watch another soldier die. He studied her, noticing the way her fingers tensed against her sleeves. It's more than that, isn't it? She hesitated, then nodded. I spent my whole life watching people I cared about get taken, used, and discarded by the Dominion. I refused to let that happen again. Dane stepped closer. And now? She met his gaze, something unreadable in her expression. Now, I think I'd fight for more than just survival. A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. But before either could say more, Rhea's voice crackled over the comms. All units, report to the war room immediately. We have a problem. Dane and Lena exchanged a glance. Guess we're not getting a quiet moment, huh? She muttered. He chuckled. Wouldn't feel right if we did. Inside the war room, tension hung thick in the air. Reyes stood at the head of the table, flanked by several high-ranking officers. A holographic map flickered to life, displaying Dominion troop movements. We intercepted a transmission, Reyes said grimly. The Dominion isn't just regrouping. They're preparing for something bigger. Something we haven't seen before. Dane frowned. What are we looking at? Reyes zoomed in on a particular sector. They're massing forces near the capital. But that's not the worst part. Our intel suggests they're bringing in something new, a prototype weapon. Lena leaned forward. What kind of weapon? We don't know, Reyes admitted. But if the Dominion is pulling something like this out, it means they're getting desperate. Dane folded his arms. Then we need to hit them first. Reyes nodded. Exactly. We have one shot at this. If we can sabotage their weapon before it's operational, we might just turn the tide of the war. Lena studied the map. Do we know where they're keeping it? Reyes hesitated. Yes. But there's a catch. He pressed a button, and the map shifted to reveal an imposing fortress deep in Dominion territory. This is the Black Citadel, Reyes said. The most heavily guarded Dominion base on the continent. Breaking in will be next to impossible. Lena smirked. Good thing we specialize in the impossible. Dane grinned. Tell us the plan. The mission was suicide. At least, that's what the others had said. But Dane and Lena didn't see it that way. They saw an opportunity. A chance to end this war before the Dominion could tighten its grip once more. They assembled a small team. Only the best infiltrators and demolition experts the Resistance had to offer. The plan was simple. Get inside the Citadel, locate the weapon, and destroy it before the Dominion could deploy it. Simple in theory, deadly in execution. Under the cover of night, they moved. Cloaked in shadows, they slipped through enemy patrols, scaling walls and bypassing security systems with practiced precision. Everything was going smoothly. Until it wasn't. The alarm blared just as they reached the inner sanctum. Shit, Lena hissed, drawing her weapon. Dane didn't hesitate. We move now. Gunfire erupted as Dominion soldiers swarmed the halls. The Resistance team fought their way through, but the Dominion was prepared. This had been a trap. They reached the chamber where the weapon was stored. A massive device humming with energy, unlike anything they had ever seen before. What the hell is that? One of their teammates muttered. Lena's fingers danced over a nearby console. It's some kind of energy disruptor. If they activate this, they could wipe out entire cities in seconds. Dane didn't wait. He set the charges. Then we make sure they never get the chance. But before he could finish, the doors slammed shut. A voice echoed through the chamber. Cold. Familiar. You really thought you could stop us? Dane's blood turned to ice. General Eric Vaughn. The Dominion's top strategist. The man responsible for wiping out Resistance strongholds. And the man who had once been Dane's commanding officer. Vaughn stepped forward, flanked by heavily armed Dominion elites. He locked eyes with Dane. You were one of my best soldiers, he said. And now look at you. A traitor. A disgrace. Dane clenched his fists. I learned the truth. You're nothing but a murderer. Vaughn smirked. And you're still the same reckless fool who doesn't know when he's lost. Lena stepped beside Dane. Funny. We were about to say the same thing to you, She pressed a button, and the charges detonated. The entire chamber shook as the weapon's power core ruptured, sending a shockwave through the fortress. Chaos erupted. The resistance team fought desperately to escape as flames consumed the citadel. Dane and Lena ran side by side, dodging collapsing structures and enemy fire. As they reached the outer walls, a blast sent them sprawling. Dane groaned, his vision swimming. He turned to see Lena struggling to stand. Vaughn loomed over her, weapon raised. "No!" Dane roared, lunging forward. A shot rang out. For a moment, everything was still. Then, Vaughn stumbled back, blood blooming across his chest. Lena stood, her pistol smoking. Dane caught her as she nearly collapsed. "You okay?" he asked, breathless. She nodded weakly. "Yeah, but we need to move." The citadel was collapsing, and they barely made it out before the entire structure caved in on itself. As they emerged into the night, smoke billowing behind them, they knew one thing. The war wasn't over. But tonight, they had one. And together, they would win the next battle. And the one after that. Because they weren't just survivors anymore. They were a force that couldn't be broken. The destruction of the Black Citadel sent shockwaves through the Dominion ranks. Without their secret weapon, their hold on the continent wavered, and for the first time in years, the Resistance had the upper hand. The tides of war were shifting. Dane and Lena, bruised but alive, returned to the Resistance stronghold as heroes. The celebrations were brief. There was still much to do. But for one night, laughter and hope filled the camp instead of fear and uncertainty. As the fires crackled and the night stretched on, Dane found Lena sitting alone on the outskirts of the camp, gazing at the stars. He sat beside her, silent for a moment before speaking. "You did it." She gave him a sideways glance. "We did it." He chuckled. "Still, you were the one who shot Vaughn." "I've been wanting to do that for years." She smirked. "I could tell." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sounds of music and laughter from the camp. Then, Lena sighed, her expression turning serious. "You know this isn't over, right?" she said softly. "The Dominion won't just give up because we took out one stronghold. They'll come back. Harder." Dane nodded. "I know. But this time, they'll be the ones on the defensive. We've given people hope. That's more powerful than any weapon." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "And what about you? What happens after the war? Have you thought about that?" He exhaled, leaning back on his elbows. "For a long time, all I knew was fighting. I never thought there could be an after." He paused, then glanced at her. "But lately, I think maybe there's more." Lena studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, maybe there is." She reached out, hesitantly at first, then laced her fingers with his. Dane looked down at their joined hands, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm glad I found you in that forest." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm glad you saved me." The stars above shimmered, and for the first time in a long time, Dane felt something he hadn't dared to before. Peace. The war wasn't over, but they weren't fighting alone anymore. Together, they would finish this. Together, they would rebuild. And when the time came, they would carve out a future worth living for. For now, that was enough.